Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to this episode of The Federal. My name is Naved Anjum, and I'm joined today by a very special guest, Tan Twan Eng, a Malaysian novelist whose third novel, The House of Doors, is on the long list for this year's Booker Prize. Welcome to the show, Mr. Eng.
Hello, hi
Or should I
Navid.
call
Thanks very much. Just call me. It's much
Okay,
more informal and more relaxed.
right, right,
Nice to
right.
meet. Nice to see you across the world.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Uh,
It's really lovely to have you with us today. So,
it's
just
really exciting to be talking to you.
Right. So, just by way of introduction, I'm sure those of us who follow the Booker Prize and those of us who are into literature and writing, they're aware of your body of work. John, of course, is an author of three novels. This is his third novel. His previous two novels were The Gift of Rain, which was published in 2007. His second novel, The Garden of Evening Mists, that won the Man Asian Literary Prize, and it also won the Walter Scott Prize for Historical Fiction. It was also shortlisted for the Man Booker Prize, and John is also one of the judges of the International Booker Prize 2003, which was declared in 2000 in May this year, in fact,
In
and
May.
he is the first Malaysian author to have had the honor. So, John, welcome again to the show. We'll begin with the House of Doors, of course, and we'll go back also to your previous two novels. To begin with, let's just get a sense of the House of Doors and how sort of you arrived at the story, considering it's a story of a portrait of a writer in distress, but it also is much more than that. It's a story of you know love, race, gender, colonialism. There are so many threads that are running through the novel. So give us a sense of how you arrived at this story of Somerset Maugham and this episode involving Ethel Proudlock and that sort of is woven into the narrative.
Well, well, the novel is set in 1921 and 1910. It's about Somerset Maugham's visit to the island of Penang in Malaya uh, to stay with his friends Robert and Lesley Hamlyn in 1921. And while he stays there with them, he becomes friends with Lesley Hamlyn, who starts telling him a bit of stories that she's heard in the last 10 years. And one of them involved the murder trial of Ethel Proudlock, a real life trial which had taken place in Kuala Lumpur in 1910. And this is based on fact in that Maugham did visit Malaya in the 20s and he heard about the trial and he turned it into one of his most famous short stories, The Letter,
Right.
which was also made into
Great.
stage plays and films a few times.
Yeah.
I first read The Letter when I was in my teens, and that was probably one of my first introductions to Somerset Maugham's writings. I loved The Letter, loved the story, but I was even more excited when I found out that he had based it on this trial, which had taken place in Kuala Lumpur, where I grew up. I found it very interesting, and it was quite curious that how did he turn these facts into this short story. So that thing had always stayed at the back of my mind that I would want to write about the origins of the letter, as it were. Um, and also, I wanted to write about a Chinese revolutionary called Dr. Sun Yat-Sen, who had also visited Penang in the 1910 to 1912. And for many years, I couldn't think of a way to how to connect these two real life characters into one novel until I came up with the idea of Lesley Hamlyn, one of the main protagonists in The House of Doors. And then I started linking them together.
Right. You also begin with her voice in the sense that the prologue actually has in the first person, and then the novel shifts to another person that's in the third person, right?
Yes. Well, because with in it, they were all in the first person because I've never written in the third person before until this book. I've always preferred the first person because it's more immediate. It grabs the reader quicker. It's like the writer is whispering to you in your ear, so it's easier to engage the reader. But with
Right.
this book, I found that I needed Somerset Maugham's chapters to be told from the third person because there's so much information about his life that I had to incorporate that it would be unnatural for him to talk about his past in the first person. It was also a good contrast because Lesley Hamlyn is a woman living in the 1900s, in the early 20th century. So her life is very confined and restricted. So her viewpoint is very much her own, and she's not privileged to have access to the wide world that Somerset Maugham has. So the contrast is that Maugham travels the world. He's very worldly. He's seen all this, and then contrasted with Leslie's voice, which is very confined. So I like the contrast between the two voices as well. It works better, I think.
Right. So the relationship, the dynamics between Leslie and her husband Robert Hamlyn was also marked by this profound silence, and there are so many concealed secrets, and I was wondering if that's also sort of, in some sense, emblematic of the sort of overarching social expectations and social mores in the British Empire, and if you
I think
could
so.
sort of,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Go on. Sorry, please.
yeah,
Well,
and.
I think so.
Mhm. So did you
Yeah.
perceive it as a broader commentary on those constraining norms?
Well,
Especially.
I never start any novel with any particular message because I find that very off-putting if I were to read a book. And
Sure.
it's very obvious that the author has an overt agenda that he's trying to shove it down my throat. And I straight away, I would just put down that book. So I always start with the characters and the story. And along the way, the characters' situations, because it's set 100 years ago,
Mhm.
will inevitably create these situations where we as a modern reader can see how unfair life was 100 years ago. You don't even have to say it overtly, you just show the situation. Leslie, as a woman living in the 1900s, marriage is more or less a way for social advancement for her because she comes from a not a well-to-do family, and she's also quite clear that she wants to marry higher up, which she has done with Robert. So she is aware that she's attained a level of success in her life, which she is quite unwilling to surrender, which I feel is quite natural for anyone. So there's all these social conventions and mores, as you mentioned, and it she bumps against them. Any character would. And as a writer, I don't want to belabor the point that this is unfair for her, this is unfair for that. I just merely describe the scenario, and then the reader can see for themselves. This is the situation. And
Right. As you were saying that bringing in Sun Yat-Sen to the narrative, that it entailed, of course, a little bit of tinkering with the timeline, isn't it?
well, the tinkering with the time actually took place with the trial, Ethel's trial,
Right.
because Ethel's
Right. Right.
trial took
Yeah.
place a year later after Sun Yat-sen's birth. So Sun Yat-sen's presence in Penang is correct factually in terms of the timeline. It's only that I brought Ethel's trial forward a year, but to merge them together, which I felt was justified because whether the trial took place then or a year later, was still the same. The effects were still the same. Um, that I had to do that for the novel to work. Otherwise, it wouldn't work at all.
Right. And Mom, of course, is a fascinating, to sort of delve into that chapter of his life. Like, there was a brief stay in Penang, and how sort of you
Yeah.
know that also is a time where he has lost all his money, and he's
Yes.
invested and he has lost his money. And you begin with, in fact, the first chapter. And if you could give us
Yes.
a sense of how, in what ways was that sort of period uh, difficult, but at the same time, in terms of writing, he was also at the peak. One of the best known writers of his time.
Well,
Uh, but
well, at
but
that stage, I think he wasn't.
Mhm.
Sorry, go on. Go on.
No, we're saying that these trials, of the personal trials that he was facing, that his marriage, and then
Yes.
his health wise also is not very sound that way. No.
Yeah. Well, at that point, he wasn't the titan that he would eventually become. He was still rising up in this level of fame and success, but he was quite successful, quite wealthy, well-to-do, and his goal was to eventually stop writing for money and just move somewhere with his secretary and boyfriend Gerald. So he had all these hopes and dreams, that he was making plans. And then suddenly his stockbroker tells him that, you've lost all your money in this unwise investment. You can't do anything. You have to really start earning again. So he was quite devastated because he had been looking forward to this. He was in an unhappy and a sort of a false marriage to Siri Welcome. He wanted to get out of that and to live with Gerald. And suddenly the option was gone. And I say that in the book that the best thing about money is not that it gives you happiness, but that it gives you options. If you're unhappy, you have the option of trying to solve the situation. But if you're not well to do and you're unhappy, you're really stuck in that situation. So that's where he was. And he was desperate, and he knew he had to write another hit to start building up his assets again. So he was quite desperate, and at the time he and Gerald had just traveled to Sarawak, which is in East Malaysia, and they had nearly died there in a drowning accident. So his health was quite frail as well. So he had all these battling going on, and that's one of the reasons he decided to accept his friend Robert's invitation to come to my house by the sea. You can stay for 2 weeks, recuperate. But of course, it's there where he starts talking to Lesley and starts finding out about how interesting her life was, even though on the surface she looks very dull and careful.
Yeah. And one of the very interesting aspects of the novel is how you sort of, uh, and this unraveling of the two characters opening up in some ways to each other. And there are many things that going on in Leslie's life as well. And Mom, of course, we know that these things were happening. His this conflicted thing about his sexuality, the relationship with, his marriage, his boyfriend, and all that, with whom he's here.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, how did you work on this sort of this relationship, which in some sense is also maybe, if you can say that, an exploration into the gender dynamics of the period, because this
It
balance.
is, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
You're quite right, because again, uh, when I finished writing my novel, it suddenly struck me that how feminist the novel was. I,
Yes.
I didn't realize that when I was writing, and that wasn't my intention. My intention was just to write that story about Lesley. But as I mentioned again, if you're writing about a woman in the 1900s, it's inevitable you're going to write about the equality and the dynamics between the genders, because there wasn't equality there. She's aware. She's an intelligent woman, so she's aware of the inequality of a situation, but she's also aware that there's nothing she can do about it. That's just how life was 100 years ago. But she's cunning in a way, so she finds her own way to survive an unhappy marriage. She's also making use of Somerset Maugham because she wants to make use of it, just as Somerset Maugham is making use of her. So you have these two characters. They are circling each other all the time and being very careful about what they say and what they reveal, testing each other, a poke here, a stab there to see how the other reacts. Slowly, the sort of a wary friendship develops between them, I think.
And bringing in, of course, Sun Yat-Sen was, did you sort of want to bring in this element of, the political climate of the 1920s British Malaya in that sense?
Oh yeah, yes. Or again, it's also, you can't avoid it if you're writing about that. That's, unless you're Jane Austen, and then you can ignore the French Revolution taking place while the entire whole body of work has no reference to any current events. Then but if I'm writing about Penang in 1900s, you always aware that there's this great European power running the Malayans and Malaysians' lives, and you're wondering what the hell are they doing there? Why are they there? And how do the local people adapt or assimilate to that? And how do they treat each other? So
Yeah.
there's there's snobbery not just from the British side, but also from the local side, because each side will always think we're better than the other side, regardless of what situation it is. So it's quite interesting to write about that, especially with Dr. Sun Yat-Sen coming in to even stir the whole mixture even more, because he's coming in with all these ideas about equality for the citizens. He wants a Republican government, and yet Lesley exposes the hypocrite that he is. When she asked him, you have so many wives, but why can't a woman have the same many husbands as well? And Sun Yat-sen is at a loss for words. He just says it's not the way that it's done, which is quite interesting to write about.
Yes. Yeah. I was also wondering about, when you sort of, in some sense, blending the real with the fictional. I mean, in the sense that, while you have this a real arc of a historical event, you also approach it with a fiction writer's eye and imagination, isn't it? And
Yes.
I was curious to know that how did that process work for you? That
What
in that
you
sense,
start
yes, yes.
you start with you have all of the information in your head, and then you think, okay, how can I make the delivery of this information and this situation gripping and emotional and engaging for the reader. I don't want to just throw out what the Americans call an info dump on the readers. You really have to bring it alive, like make it part of the characters' problems and their struggles. And that's the hard part, to dramatize all the information and the tensions. It really was hard to straddle the line, not to go this way too much or not to be too cold and emotional, and then the characters come off like robots just parroting the information. It's quite difficult, I have to say. Yeah.
And there's also a kind of a lyrical quality to your prose, in the sense that the descriptions of landscape, of there's personal trials and tribulations. They're very, very lush and evocative in some sense, and I think more than mere imagery, they also in some sense represent the characters, their emotional turmoil,
Yes.
and in the wider sort of narrative of love, duty, betrayal, and all. And I was curious to know if you have to like work on that texture of the prose, and or is it something that you really have to sort of thread over?
Well, it's one of the hardest things to work on the prose, because I'm always trying to push myself with each book. It has to be better than the previous one in terms of the quality of the writing, to start with.
Yeah.
And I'm always in dread. I'm repeating myself with descriptions. If I come upon a very striking way of saying something, and then I have to think, have I used this before in the first or the second book? And normally I have to go back to the first book and check. And thank goodness for ebooks, because you can just do a word search and you can find, okay, I've never used it. So it's very difficult, but I want the readers to be immersed, to be lost in the world I'm creating. The setting and the atmosphere has to be a distinctive character in their own right, so that readers are reading it not just for this to know about the characters, but to feel not the characters' emotions, yes, but also the world that they were living in. I'm trying to make the readers time travel, into that time of the past. So it is extremely difficult, and that's one of the reasons why I'm such a slow writer. I'm never happy with the first few drafts, so I have to keep working at it, polishing it until I feel it's good enough.
Yeah. This particular novel took you nearly a decade or so, because the last one came out in 2000.
Well, yeah, I wasn't writing full time for a decade, so it probably took about 6 or 7 years.
Right.
Because in the time, Garden of Evening Mist came out, and it had quite some success, so I had to promote that, spend a lot of time promoting it, and then they started adapting it into a film as well. So I had to deal with all the negotiations with the contracts. That took a long time. That took
You
such a
mean the
long
second
time, and
novel, the Garden of Evening
no,
Mist?
yes, yeah, they because with the producers they kept sending a lot of contracts because we
Okay.
were never happy with the terms, So every time a new contract would come in my inbox, it would be, another 100 pages or 200-page contract,
Mhm.
which I have to go through again line by line and compare it to the previous contract to see
Mhm.
what had changed. So that was very time consuming. I mean, there was a stage when I had, because I wasn't going to waste money printing out another 200-page contract every time it came in. So I would open 3 computers and one iPad, one laptop, and then I would say, okay, that's the previous draft. This is this one, and I have to go through the clause 3 screens, like as though I was a stockbroker somewhere checking the stocks. So that took a lot of time, and then also reading the scripts as well. They sent me the script for approval. That took a long time as well. So yeah, there was a lot of interruptions
Okay.
between the writing. Yeah,
Is the movie out already, or is it?
it came out it was released late this November December 2019 in Asia, and it started moving towards the West 2020 just before COVID hit. So it's more or less died because of COVID. It's just the momentum was just lost. So you can get it on HBO now. I think HBO. Yeah, it
Okay.
streams on HBO. Yeah,
I should check this out. Yeah.
yeah.
Because it was a beautiful novel, and it would be interesting to see how it was sort of, you know.
They did it. They did it well. I mean, they did it very well. They had to change the story because it's a different medium. It's not a novel, but they did it very well. I have to say the director was very good. I was very lucky to have him. Tom Lin. He was very
Right,
sensitive director, very good director. Yeah.
right. Coming back to the novel, John, is this this what at the heart of the novel, of course, is this the Proudlock thing, right? And this is also in some way, it sort of triggered an interest on the part of mom, and who found it sort of the material to be very very sort of apt for.
Scandalous. He
Yeah, it's
liked
scandalous,
scandalous.
right?
Yes, he
You have
loved
all
that.
the
Yes,
juices basically. So yeah, yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah.
if
He
you could
loved it because
talk about that, but also to
he
people's
knew what was
standard.
he knew what would sell. He was
Yeah,
primarily writing for to make money, so he knew what would sell. Yeah.
yeah. That's also an instinct as you must have as a writer, isn't it?
I I don't know. I think you hope what you write would sell, but
Mhm.
I'm really more concerned with the quality of the writing that my books. I won't feel embarrassed by my books, when I go into a shop and then I turn the page and read this. Oh, this is how could I have published it? So that I'm more concerned about that. But of course, I'm glad that they sell. I'm very glad that they sell. But that's
Right.
I mean, if I were really concerned about getting my books to sell, I would actually put more sex scenes in there. But there's seldom any sex scenes. I think there's none in any of my books. There don't never been any sex scenes in my book for some reason. Yeah, so
Right.
I'm more concerned with the quality of the writing than yeah than the selling. I think. Yeah.
Right. Ton, you also belong to a handful of writers who are taking these Asian stories to the world in that sense, and we have had a couple of writers from Asia, including writers like Tash Aw, who are sort of drawing on that kind of heritage to write the stories that need to be told, and the stories that are not being told in the way they should be told. And I was just curious to know your sort of how do you view this need for Asian writers to tell their own stories in the way that they choose to tell, rather than be dictated by, as I said, by the market.
Well, I think first of all, you can't write according to the market. Uh, I've never done that because if a lot of people assume that I tailor as my books to the Western world, especially with the Gift of Rain, the first one. They say, oh, a lot of people have said, oh, he got published because he made everything to the Western taste, but not many people know that the Gift of Rain was turned down by every publisher in the UK, every one of them. And
That's
their main complaint was that they did understand it, and their marketing team didn't know how to market it, so they don't want it. It only took a new independent publisher based in Newcastle who was brave enough to publish that. So to say that, you know, I mean, if I had tailored my book for non-Asian taste, that Gift of Rain would have been signed up just like that immediately. But no, every publisher turned it down, and I was quite despondent about it. So, but in the end, I think the quality of the writing is what has to lift your manuscript above. There are thousands of people submitting to publishing houses, especially in the UK and the US. So they're not only receiving manuscripts from outside their own country, they're also receiving manuscripts from their own people inside. And your manuscript, your writing really has to be of this quality that is above what they're getting. The story is when I was first looking for an agent in the UK for the Gift of Rain, my agent slush pile reader, she has to go through all the submissions, and then she has to tell my agent, do we sign this guy on? And she said, you know what one of the reasons why I bothered to read the first 3 chapters of your manuscript is because your CV had no spelling errors in it. So she looked at my CV and she said I'm constantly, because there's so many submissions. My agent gets 5,000 submissions a year. 5,000. Of that, she signs maybe 3 writers. So you have to know that in the industry, they are all looking for the slightest reason not to read your manuscript, because they have so many. And you really, it's like a job interview. When you make submissions, everything has to be perfect. Everything, spelling, commas, grammar. Yeah. The moment they see something off, they say, yeah. So that's to start with. You have to really act. Be a professional. It's getting a job. It's like getting a job. You really can't be artistic about it and say, oh, they'll overlook my hastily scrawled message because I'm such an artist and my work is so great. They can't. It's a business. Yeah.
Yeah, and in this context, Twan, I think I want to bring in this role of independent press. And last year we had last year Shehan Karnatilika, whose novel, and it's a very interesting. And I want to mention this because it's very interesting in the sense that the novel was published, of course, in India before the pandemic, and then it gets an indie press from Sri Lanka, who in Ling chooses to publish it, and then it goes on to win the prize. So, do you think that we also need to have these presses, from different Asian countries, who can sort of? I mean, in England there is today. In UK we have many more indie presses than who are doing this.
Yeah.
But do you think that it's more crucial to have small presses doing this job for us?
I think it's not a question of whether it's crucial or it's a question of there should be as many presses as possible, whether indie or part of a chain, because the more publishing presses you have, the better the chances of the books coming out. Right. But I found that I suppose that the indie presses are more willing to take risk in what they publish, probably because they don't have a board, shareholders to report to. They don't have to really worry about. Well, they have to worry about making a profit, but if they don't make that much a profit, they can still justify to the owners and say we're doing good work here. Whereas with a big publisher, there's always the bottom line they have to be looking at. So yeah, I think the indies are. I mean, I was first, as I just told you, I was published by an independent when I started out. But the problem is that the independent publishers must also grow along with their writers.
Yes.
You can't. Let's say you're an indie press and then you publish this book which turns out to be a big hit. Now you just can't rely on that author to sustain you. Hoping that the second book will come, and then you as an indie press, you also have the obligation and and the need to really build up your indie press company so that you are both of you, the suddenly successful author and the indie press, are growing at the same level so that both of you can help each other. Let's say the successful author is so high up now, but the indie press is still, in terms of marketing clout, promotional advances, it's inevitable that this writer now will move on to a more established press.
Yes.
So this press, they have to, that they can't just stay at the level. They really have to push. And what I see is that not many indie presses are making that climb to grow along with the authors. So
Yeah.
that's quite something that I think they have to pay attention to.
Right. Absolutely. And you just said, and this brings me to your first novel, that how tough it was to find a publisher for The Gift of Rain, your first novel
Yeah.
in 2007. And this is it's very shocking because the novel, I think, is a powerful novel. I would like you to talk a little bit about it because it's of course both your novels in some sense, both The Gift of Rain and The Guardian of Evening Mists, had this backdrop of the war or the aftermath of the war, and this relationship of people with the sort of and the different tests that they go through for to prove their
Yeah.
loyalty to the nation, or whether they're loyalty to their families or loyalty to the country. And this is this struggle, this how they are sort of torn between these two loyalties. And if you could talk about these two novels and how you sort of arrived at them.
Okay. The Gift of Rain is about a 17-year-old young man who's half English, half Chinese, and he's never felt at home in Penang. This is in the 1930s. So he befriends a Japanese diplomat who comes along, and then the war happens. So he has to choose not only between his own heritage, but against this sudden aggressor from Japan. And with all my novels, I always try to put my characters in situations where it's impossible to escape from. They have to make a choice. And the problem is the choices, none of the choices are ever completely correct, which is like life. There's no one choice which is, oh, this is 100% right now. It's never. It's always shades of gray, and you have to just make the best choices out of the options that you have. And it still messes up his life anyway. Whichever choices he made, he would have messed up his life. And that, I'm interested as a writer in that to put them in this situation and to say, okay, how are you going to get out of this now? How are you going to survive? And with the second book, The Garden of Atheist, which takes place after the war, it's about a survivor of a POW camp at the Comfort Women's Station. She survives the camps, but her sister doesn't. But her sister was a huge fan of Japanese gardening, and
Yes.
my character Yun Ling decides she wants to build a memorial garden for her sister. So she has to go up to Cameron Highlands to ask a Japanese gardener to help her build it. So imagine the tension that she has. She hates the Japanese, but because of her love for her sister, she has to go and beg this Japanese gardener, please, will you build a garden for my sister? And the Japanese gardener says, no, I won't. And imagine the rage. So again, there's all this tension that I want my characters to experience to see how are you going to overcome that? Uh, so that the question of loyalty is not just to their own heritage or their country, but it's actually the question of loyalty to themselves.
Themselves.
They
True.
have to be true to themselves, to and that's the hardest thing I find for not just for fictional characters, but for us, you and I. How do we be true to ourselves, be loyal to what we are, and still make a success in our daily lives? How to interact with people, how to give in, how to know when to give in when we have to, and then feel angry about it, but how to live, basically. That's the whole how to live. Yeah, in all my novels, how do we live?
Yeah. Yeah. That's very well said. And I was
Yeah.
also curious to know about, like, most of us, I think, especially people in the West, they would not get to know some stories because it remains, for a lot of many of us who live in the countries that we live in of South Asia, to sort of find a publisher or just to get our stories across to them. And I was curious, when it comes to Malaysia, what is the writing landscape like? And if you could talk a little bit about, some of the promising writers who are writing, in English.
Well, I try to stay out of any writing scene in any country I'm in because
Right.
I find that they're very small and claustrophobic wherever you are, even in London. It's so almost incestuous. So that's one of the reasons. Even when I spend some months in Cape Town, I stay out of it. I just want to be left alone and work on my book. So, in terms of the writing Malaysia, I'm not quite keyed up on it, but I know that there are a lot more writers now, and there's a woman called Sharon Bakar in Kuala Lumpur who organizes a public reading every month where anyone can go in, whether you're published or unpublished. If you've got something to read, she welcomes you to do it. So that sort of thing is very interesting as a platform for writers to go out and maybe test their work in the audience and see whether it's effective or not. Um, and of course, with Penguin Random House opening in Singapore, I think they started publishing a lot more books now,
Yeah.
which I suspect is worrying for the independent publishers
Mm.
in Singapore. I think the independent publishers are quite concerned that there's suddenly this big giant coming in and starts grabbing all the titles to be published. So it is quite complex.
Yeah.
Do you want a big publisher to open up an HQ in your country
Mm.
and start publishing, or do you, to the detriment often of the smaller presses?
Mm.
So I don't know what the answer is. It's quite difficult to say. I suppose for the writer, they're happy because hey, suddenly I have more avenues to get published.
Mm.
But there's always wins and losers, in a situation like that. So I don't know. I don't know what to say.
Yeah. Okay. Coming back to the Booker long list, of course, you're one of the only two people who I think Western Lane by Chetna Maru. She happens to be of Indian descent. I mean, she was not born in India, but sort of she had
Yeah.
her parents sort of so I just wanted to know that this is a very eclectic list, of course, of 13 novels.
Yes.
There are
Yeah.
four debuts and there are four Irish novels, and I was just curious if you could give us a sense of your own sense of, considering you were on the International Booker jury as well, this variety of stories on the long list, and what do you make of this list?
Well, first of all, because I was one of the judges for the International Booker Prize
Yes.
2023, I know how difficult it must have been to come up with a long list because it was extremely difficult. And often painful as well. The choices you have to discard along the way. So I quite sympathize with them, and I know how hard it is. Uh, I think it's an interesting long list. It's unexpected in many ways because a lot of the big names are not on it. Salman Rushdie isn't on it. What's the name? Barbara Kingsolver isn't on it, and a lot of their fans are in a rage about it.
Yes.
But that's the thing about the Booker Prize is that you can never predict because every year the panel of judges are different and they have different takes. Uh, that's one of the strengths. With other prizes where the panels are the same every year, you can sort of know the taste after a while. But with this one, it's so it's a very, as you say, eclectic list. And the only one I know on it is Sebastian Barry because we've met a few times over the years at the Walter Scott Prize events in Scotland, and he's an amazing writer. And more than that, he's a performer.
Yeah.
I don't like I don't like I don't like reading my own books in public,
Mhm.
and I don't like sitting there and listening to another writer read because I
Yeah.
just think most writers can't read their own words. But Sebastian was a supreme performer, and I was just blown away sitting there. He started off by getting into character.
Yeah.
And he was thumping his feet, and then he started singing,
Yeah.
and then, yeah, and that's how, and the reading was incredible. And he's a really nice guy as well. So it was good to see him on the list. And that's
Right.
the only author I know, personally. So
Right.
yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens next.
But that's also something, that's a trait which is very difficult to achieve for some writers who are, because writing per se is a very lonely exercise, isn't it? That you do it in the solitude of your of your room, or in your corner of
The room, yes, yeah,
office. Yes,
your
yes.
study, yes, yeah,
So what do you make of this
yeah.
thing
So
that
it's
the writers have to be performers, and what these literary festivals tend to do, that making performers out of writers?
uh, I think I'm not too happy with it because I don't like doing. I like chatting. I like chatting to the audience. I like chatting
Right.
to the moderator. I love that, and I love taking questions from the audience because
Yes.
it really forces me to think on my feet. When the questions are tough. Some of them.
Yeah.
I really don't like reading my book because I feel it is quite artificial. I'm not, yeah, and but yeah, that's the demands of the industry again. You are like a pop singer. You go out, you perform your hit singles from your album. You
Yeah.
you read the best. You read the best sections from the books.
Yeah.
Uh, some writers love doing it, so it's fine. But
Yeah.
personally, I find that I would rather talk to the audience.
Yeah.
Me go into and chat with them. Yeah. But some audience love to hear the writers read as well. So
Right.
I don't know. It's
Right.
yeah.
Just to clarify, this was not a comment on Sebastian Barry at all. He's a great
Oh
writer,
no, he's a great writer and a great performer of his books.
a
I mean,
great
that
performer. Yeah.
was
So it's
revelatory to sit
general
there
questions
and yeah.
about this trend that, and I thought I should ask you. One last question. I've already taken so much of your time, but just last question, and then
Okay.
we'll wind up. About you arrived, of course, at writing from a background of in law,
Yeah.
and I was just curious that to know what brought you to sort of to full time writing.
Well, I wasn't a very good lawyer to start with because I
Okay.
wasn't interested in many aspects of it. I like the drafting of documents. Surprise,
Mhm.
surprise. But
Right.
I didn't like dealing with clients. I didn't like preparing for trial because I found that there's a lot of work. You work until midnight, just to go to trial the next morning.
Right.
And I was always pushing my clients to settle because I was basically too lazy to go to court. I didn't want to go. So I was telling my clients to settle, settle. You'll save you stress, it'll save you money, and you'll save you years of aggravation. Just settle and you'll be happy. So, and of course, the partners of the law firm weren't happy with that because the earnings drop. My earnings drop if I don't go to
Yeah.
court. So the main reason I became a full-time writer is that I think I'm a much better writer than a lawyer. so,
Yeah.
so
You also train in Aikido, and one of the, I think, in the
I did, yes, yeah, yeah. I trained for about almost 20 years, obsessively, and then one day I just woke up and said, okay, I've had it. And I stopped just like that. Yeah, it's weird. It's weird.
well, on that note, thank you so much, Don. It was really lovely talking to you.
Thank you. Yes.
Subscribe to the Federal's YouTube page for more news and updates.